Chapter 15 of Allan and the Holy Flower. Allan and the Holy Flower by H. Rider Haggard. Chapter 15 The Motombo. After my dream I went to sleep again, till I was finally aroused by a strong ray of light hitting me straight in the eye. Where the dickens does that come from? I thought to myself, for these huts had no windows. Then I followed the ray to its source, which I perceived was a small hole in the mud wall some 5 feet above the floor. I rose and examined the said hole, and noted that it appeared to have been freshly made, for the clay at the sides of it was in no way discoloured. I reflected that if anyone wanted to eavesdrop, such an aperture would be convenient, and went outside the hut to pursue my investigations. Its wall, I found, was situated about 4 feet from the eastern part of the encircling reed fence, which showed no signs of disturbance, although there, in the outer face of the wall, was the hole, and beneath it on the lime flooring lay some broken fragments of plaster. I called Hans and asked him if he had kept watch round the hut when the wrapped-up man visited us during the night. He answered yes, and that he could swear that no one had come near it, since several times he had walked to the back and looked. Somewhat comforted, but not satisfied, I went in to wake up the others, to whom I said nothing of this matter, since it seemed foolish to alarm them for no good purpose. A few minutes later the tall, silent women arrived with our hot water. It seemed curious to have hot water brought to us in such a place by these very queer kind of housemaids, but so it was. The Pongo, I may add, were, like the Zulus, very clean in their persons, though whether they all used hot water I cannot say. At any rate, it was provided for us. Half an hour later they returned with breakfast, consisting chiefly of a roasted kid, of which, as it was whole and therefore unmistakable, we partook thankfully. A little later the majestic Komba arrived. After many compliments and inquiries as to our general health, he asked whether we were ready to start on our visit to the Motombo, who, he added, was expecting us with much eagerness. I inquired how he knew that, since we had only arranged to call on him late on the previous night, and I understood that he lived a day's journey away. But Komba put the matter by with a smile and a wave of his hand. So in due course off we went, taking with us all our baggage, which now that it had been lightened by the delivery of the presents, was of no great weight. 5 minutes' walk along the wide main street led us to the northern gate of Rica Town. Here we found the Kalubi himself with an escort of 30 men armed with spears. I noted that unlike the Mazitu they had no bows and arrows. He announced in a loud voice that he proposed to do us the special honour of conducting us to the sanctuary of the Holy One, by which we understood him to mean the Motombo. When we politely begged him not to trouble, being in an irritable mood or assuming it, he told us rudely to mind our own business. Indeed, I think this irritability was real enough, which, in the circumstances known to the reader, was not strange. At any rate, an hour or so later it declared itself in an act of great cruelty which showed us how absolute was this man's power in all temporal matters. Passing through a little clump of bush, we came to some gardens surrounded by a light fence, through which a number of cattle of a small and delicate breed, they were not unlike Jerseys in appearance, had broken to enjoy themselves by devouring the crops. This garden, it appeared, belonged to the Kalubi for the time being, who was furious at the destruction of its produce by the cattle, which also belonged to him. "Where is the herd?" he shouted. A hunt began, and presently the poor fellow, he was no more than a lad, was discovered asleep behind a bush. When he was dragged before him, the Kalubi pointed, first to the cattle, then to the broken fence and the devastated garden. The lad began to mutter excuses and pray for mercy. "Kill him," said the Kalubi, whereon the herd flung himself to the ground, and clutching him by the ankles, began to kiss his feet, crying out that he was afraid to die. The Kalubi tried to kick himself free, and failing in this, lifted his big spear and made an end of the poor boy's prayers and life at a single stroke. The escort clapped their hands in salute or approval, after which 4 of them, at a sign, took up the body and started with it at a trot for Rica Town, where probably that night it appeared upon the grid. Brother John saw, and his big white beard bristled with indignation like the hair on the back of an angry cat, while Stephen sputtered something beginning with "You brute," and lifted his fist as though to knock the Kalubi down. This, had I not caught hold of him, I have no doubt he would have done. "O Kalubi," gasped Brother John, "do you not know that blood calls for blood? In the hour of your own death remember this death." "Would you bewitch me, white man?" said the Kalubi, glaring at him angrily. "If so—" and once more he lifted the spear, but as John never stirred, held it poised irresolutely. Komba himself thrust between them, crying, "Back, Dogeetah, who dare to meddle with our customs? Is not the Kalubi lord of life and death?" Brother John was about to answer, but I called to him in English, "For Heaven's sake be silent, unless you want to follow the boy. We are in these men's power." Then he remembered and walked away, and presently we marched forward as though nothing had happened. Only from that moment I do not think that any of us worried ourselves about the Kalubi and what might befall him. Still, looking back on the thing, I think that there was this excuse to be made for the man: he was mad with the fear of death, and knew not what he did. All that day we travelled on through rich flat country that, as we could tell from various indications, had once been widely cultivated. Now the fields were few and far between, and bush, for the most part a kind of bamboo scrub, was reoccupying the land. About midday we halted by a water pool to eat and rest, for the sun was hot, and here the four men who had carried off the boy's body rejoined us, and made some report. Then we went forward once more towards what seemed to be a curious and precipitous wall of black cliff, beyond which the volcanic-looking mountain towered in stately grandeur. By 3 o'clock we were near enough to this cliff, which ran east and west as far as the eye could reach, to see a hole in it, apparently where the road terminated, that appeared to be the mouth of a cave. The Kalubi came up to us, and in a shy kind of way tried to make conversation. I think that the sight of this mountain drawing ever nearer vividly recalled his terrors, and caused him to desire to efface the bad impression he knew he had made on us, to whom he looked for safety. Among other things he told us that the hole we saw was the door of the house of the Motombo. I nodded my head, but did not answer, for the presence of this murderous king made me feel sick. So he went away again, looking at us in a humble and deprecatory manner. Nothing further happened until we reached the remarkable wall of rock that I have mentioned, which I suppose is composed of some very hard stone that remained when the softer rock in which it lay was disintegrated by millions of years of weather or washings by the water of the lake. Or perhaps its substance was thrown out of the bowels of the volcano when this was active. I am no geologist and cannot say, especially as I lacked time to examine the place. At any rate, there it was, and there in it appeared the mouth of a great cave that I presume was natural, having once formed a kind of drain through which the lake overflowed when Pongo-land was under water. We halted, staring dubiously at this darksome hole, which no doubt was the same that Babemba had explored in his youth. Then the Kalubi gave an order, and some of the soldiers went to huts that were built near the mouth of the cave, where I suppose guardians or attendants lived, though of these we saw nothing. Presently they returned with a number of lighted torches that were distributed among us. This done, we plunged, shivering, at least I shivered, into the gloomy recesses of that great cavern, the Kalubi going before us with half our escort, and Komba following behind us with the remainder. The floor of the place was made quite smooth, doubtless by the action of water, as were the walls and roof, so far as we could see them, for it was very wide and lofty. It did not run straight, but curved about in the thickness of the cliff. At the first turn the Pongo soldiers set up a low and eerie chant which they continued during its whole length, that according to my pacings was something over 300 yards. On we wound, the torches making stars of light in the intense blackness, till at length we rounded a last corner where a great curtain of woven grass, now drawn, was stretched across the cave. Here we saw a very strange sight. On either side of it, near to the walls, burned a large wood fire that gave light to the place. Also more light flowed into it from its further mouth that was not more than 20 paces from the fires. Beyond the mouth was water which seemed to be about 200 yards wide, and beyond the water rose the slopes of the mountain that was covered with huge trees. Moreover, a little bay penetrated into the cavern, the point of which bay ended between the two fires. Here the water, which was not more than 6 or 8 feet wide and shallow, formed the berthing place of a good-sized canoe that lay there. The walls of the cavern, from the turn to the point of the tongue of water,